Here at UUCM, we use monthly themes facilitated by the Soul Matters organization. This summer, as I was looking ahead to these September services, I struggled to connect with the planned theme of renewal. Given the ongoing pandemic, the rising racial reckoning, the only going to get more and more maddening presidential election, I felt that the real theme for September ought to be fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a wild ride. As lovely as renewal sounded, it felt too early. I sensed renewal as a future we're heading toward, a point on the horizon toward which we must aim all of who we are and all that we're doing. Right now, the needed focus is more about resilience, I believe. More about becoming increasingly flexible, about finding and holding on to the threads of our essential selves and our essential values, and letting go of so much of what we usually try to cling to for a sense of security, just when grasping feels most urgent. Like the rain in Jan Garrett's song, renewal is coming eventually, but we've got some steep miles to go. The spiritual need, it seems to me, is to ready ourselves for renewal and to help each other stay heart-centered and open-hearted on the rough, anxiety-ridden, and transforming roads ahead, so that we're prepared for deep and transformational opportunities for renewal whenever portals open to them. Therefore, we've chosen to focus on heart-centered renewal as our theme this month. Our theme for the year, really, with that larger, ongoing journey in mind and heart. When Gail and I first brainstormed images and symbols that might embody this theme of renewal, Gail named the phoenix, that mythological bird that lives for 5 or 6 centuries in the desert and then burns itself on a funeral pyre in order to rise from the ashes with renewed youth, to live through another cycle. When Gail named the phoenix, I remembered a line in a song by Ben Abraham and Sarah Bareilles titled, "This Is On Me." It's a song about the impending end of a relationship and the very tentative possibilities of saving it in a new form. It's a very tender song. Ben and Sarah sing, "Some phoenix may rise from these ashes, but the fire comes first." That's exactly how I feel about renewal and the future these days. Well, almost exactly. My hopeful self sings instead, "Some phoenix will rise from these ashes, but the fire comes first." The fact that we've had so many fires since that conversation, including a fire right here, affecting some of you very directly, and close enough to put UUCM's building here in the evacuation warning zone, all of that's heightened the strength of that image for me and the depth and power of the journey between this moment and renewal to come. Christie's wonderful stories about birding the burn, about chronicling the abundant bird life that burn snags invite, sparked memories for me of a particular variety of bird from my childhood, the Kirtland's warbler. The Kirtland's warbler is one of the first species protected under the Endangered Species Act of 1973. They'd always been very rare since first identified by Europeans in 1841. But by 1974, their population was down to 167 singing males, which is how they count these birds, by their song. At one time, there were only 7 square miles of breeding habitat available to them. Kirtland's warblers winter in the Bahamas and then migrate north, and 95% of them nest in only one place on Earth, in the middle of the Michigan Mitten, not far from where I grew up. They have one of the most geographically restricted breeding distributions of any bird in the continental United States. The thing is, Kirtland's warblers nest almost exclusively in jack pine trees, and only in jack pine trees that are between 5 feet and 16.5 feet tall. And only in jack pine trees between 5 and 16.5 feet tall, growing close enough to each other for their branches to overlap so as to hide the birds' nests. This means that Kirtland's warblers need relatively young, dense stands of jack pines before the trees get too tall, which means they require that new jack pine forests are getting started at least every 15 or 20 years. So they always have trees of the right height for nesting. And there's one more catch. Jack pine pine cones only open and release their seeds under extreme heat. Once in a very great while, the weather in Michigan can get hot enough to do it, but most of the time, it requires fire. It requires that jack pine forests burn periodically in order for Kirtland's warblers to survive as a species. I expect that you have your own stories, your own metaphors and parallels for this awareness that in order for something new to arise, the old has to come apart enough, maybe even completely, in order to make the new possible. The truth that sometimes things must burn or otherwise be destroyed in their current form in order for new life to take shape, or even for existing rare and precious life to continue. The knowledge that sometimes it takes a while after the coming undone before new growth reaches the right sweet spot height for giving birth. You may know of relationships that wither or die of starvation or thirst, or that implode or explode before people find enough energy to change their behaviors or take action towards something better. You may know of organizations and institutions that come crashing down or that slowly fade into silence, releasing people and resources to invest in something new, something more in tune with current values and needs. You may know firsthand of dreams and expectations that have to be released, let go, or dashed, or sometimes ripped away before a truer path and a truer self can be seen. At the time, such painful endings seem the worst of all the possibilities. Until later, looking back, one recognizes the necessity of the ending for the beginnings and all the benefit that came after, eventually. In seminary, one of my teachers, Tandeka, who grew up as the child of a preacher in a black church, pointed out that the white Protestant religious traditions, which is where Unitarian Universalism came from, tend to want to keep things cool and reasoned and orderly, emotionally and spiritually calm. Historically, in our traditions, we don't want to get too worked up, and we get anxious when it's otherwise. When what's actually needed to bind us together meaningfully as a theologically varied community, what's needed to reach into and transform our hearts, what's needed to make room for the movement of the Spirit, what's needed to allow us to love beyond belief, as Tandeka would put it. What's needed is to raise the heat. She tried to teach us quiet, bookish, cool, reasoned ministerial students to raise the heat in our services and our ministries. The challenge in general then is to raise the heat enough for transformation, but not so much that people get burned or everything destroyed. The challenge is to manage a controlled burn, which, as you know, can't always be controlled for better, for worse. Or it's important at least to recognize the value of the heat. In my own internal journey, I've been extending this metaphor of necessary heat to the racial reckoning underway in the United States, as the nation faces in new ways its original sin of slavery. Nothing about racism and white supremacy will change significantly until there is enough heat and pressure to melt or burn what holds the current structures and behaviors in place. Personally, I prefer that things happen calmly, peacefully, smoothly, without confrontation. And I know that addressing something as foundational to our nation's heritage as racism will require some mighty, powerful heat. Perhaps the fires this time will burn hot enough, or long enough, or in the right enough places to open up more genuine possibility of liberation for all of us. Even Trump's latest edict trying to ban racial sensitivity training in federal agencies only adds fuel to that fire. I find myself applying this heat metaphor to all of the national politics these days and the current threats to democracy as we have known it. As viscerally frightening as some of the possibilities feel, the way that I'm able to hold hope and to face the disorienting evening news each day is to understand that these fires, too, may provide the needed heat to better confirm America's soul, as Catherine Lee Bates put it in America the Beautiful, and to lead the nation ultimately into more of its promise. I picture the Buddha smiling at all of this, at all of us in our angst. The Buddha who passes down through myriad lineages the truth that everything is, always has been, and always will be uncertain, unpredictable, and in disorienting flux. Gautama Buddha taught that we suffer when we deny and struggle against instability and change. In other words, when we struggle against the nature of existence. And oh, my friends, I know we are being gifted with a lot to struggle with lately. Our greatest suffering might not come from what's happening, what frightens us at the surface, but from our very human resistance to the truth that everything is always in motion, that we ourselves are always in motion. As Pema Chodron puts it, the ordinary and obvious truth of change. There, for me, is one pathway to hope, to learn to let go enough to enter the uncertainty of this time with an open heart and open expectations, looking not backward to some sort of return to the familiar, but forward to some yet to be revealed possibilities. To understand that even a burned forest is not truly barren, at least not for long. With so much in our lives uncertain right now, this cannot help but be a time of deep anxiety and heartbreak and tenderness. These feelings come with the experience of this kind of in-between moment, and we'll need to hold each other in all of the nurturing ways that we can, so that we might learn, as Reverend Doug Kraft invited us in his offering of the Buddha's essential teachings, might offer us the invitation to turn toward our pain instead of away from it, and to feel and see our pain on its own terms, the invitation to relax into our suffering in order to know it more honestly and more deeply. The invitation to settle into and savor the tenderness that is always underneath our angst and suffering, where with openness we might discover an experience of tenderness that leads to freedom. As Doug said to us, the only path that works in the long run goes through the suffering, through the tenderness, through the openness, rather than around them. Christy Scher has been sharing with me that many people who talk to her about burn snags expect that there's nothing there in those forests after a fire, nothing of worth. But Christy knows from experience about the abundant life that arises in the aftermath of a fire, and she lights up when she talks about it. You'll be glad to know that with controlled burns and several other kinds of on-the-ground work for decades, there are now 2,300 breeding pairs of Kirtland's warblers. The recovery numbers exceeded expectations for 16 years in a row, and Kirtland's warblers have been taken off the endangered species list. It's difficult to imagine with any sort of clarity life beyond these fires, beyond the pandemic, beyond the economic unknowns, beyond the presidential election, no matter how it turns out. We cannot know this future. At this entrance to the new year, to the church year, I invite us to stay heart-centered and open-hearted, and to dream of rain, yes, to dream as much as we need of rain coming down soft and easy, sweet and clear, without any need to rhyme it with fear. We need the respite, and the rain will come eventually. And in order to cultivate our resilience and our honest hope for our own lives and for a world genuinely more compassionate, more sustainable, more just, I invite us to know also that chances are the fire comes first, and that may be just what's needed to release the seeds of a future closer to our vision. Seeds that, despite all our previous efforts, are still trapped inside impenetrable shells that will open only with high enough heat. Seeds for the next grove of growth and new life in time. So may it be, my friends. So may we be.